My name is G. Lynn. I am a member of the Tri-Town Area Historical Society of Dawson and the Tri-Town area. And we felt fitting to have one of our local ladies highlighted in this feature. Her name was Mrs. Sarah B. Cochran. She was born a farm girl, and we sort of label her as she went from farm girl to domestic to industrialist. She was a woman way beyond her time, and she was born April 22nd, 1857. She was hired at a very early age as a domestic in the James Cochran household. While working there, she fell in love, you might say, with a young man, the eldest son of James Cochran, Philip Galley Cochran. They began to date and they were married in 1879. Mr. Cochran built her a lovely home in the small town of Vanderbilt across the river from Dawson. They lived in the house and had their one and only child named James Philip in 1880 in the house at Vanderbilt. And in 1890, Mr. Cochran, he wanted to retire, semi-retire, so he built a large home, James, in Dawson. It's right on the main street. It was entitled the Little Jim House. He lived there with his wife until his death in 1894. And then his wife died in 1896, leaving the entire estate and the coal and coke business to Philip Cochran and his wife Sarah B. They worked the business together, and through Mrs. Cochran's business venture, she literally tripled the Cochran estate. In 1899, her husband passed away of a fatal heart attack while vacationing out in the country at a home they had built called a summer home called the White House. While living out there, he had the heart attack, and so thus the company was then, the very large company was dumped into the lap of his wife, Sarah B. She was overwhelmed, but she asked her nephew, Frank Tarr, to help with the business. He helped her along, and they ran the business quite successfully. She left Dawson in 1901, shortly after the death of her son, and traveled extensively. She collected ideas to build a new home here when she returned to the States. Upon returning, coming back to Dawson, she lived in the original family structure on Main Street, the Little Jim House, and began plans to build. She had 788 acres of ground out in the outskirts of Dawson, and so she chose this area where their summer home was to build her large permanent home. She built an English Tudor-style mansion, which consisted of 35 rooms, 8 bathrooms. She had 8 live-in maids, 2 men servants, a chauffeur, you name it, she had it at Linden Hall. She lived, you might say, a reclusive life after going out to Linden Hall, and she had many parties and so on and so forth that the maid service provided and worked for her for that, but she mainly entertained and set up on the second floor landing of the Great Hall area to meet her guests. Mrs. Cochran, while living out at Linden Hall in 1936, but before that she was rendered semi-invalid. For 12 to 15 years, she'd suffered a fractured hip from a windstorm on the porch of the Great Hall, and the door blew against her. Mrs. Cochran, after her passing in 1936, she was very benevolent to the area. Many things were left by Mrs. Cochran. She built a very grand church in the town of Dawson, the Philip G. Cochran Memorial United Methodist Church. All the beautiful stained windows were put in by the Hunt Company, which she purchased. Also, she was a purchaser of many pieces of Tiffany jewelry and also beautiful Tiffany windows in Linden Hall. She was buried in Cochran Cemetery on the outskirts of town. Very simple, you could almost tell how plain she was. Very simple monuments, very low to the ground, almost like modern times today. She was not a spendthrift for things like that, but she lived very modest, and she was very benevolent with her money. She was a great lady, and we're very proud to say that she was in our community and held the Tri-Town area together as well. And so we thank Mrs. Cochran and her ancestors that are still living. We thank them for their contribution they gave to our town.